We got the color right. We need to adjust the size. So the size, it said it was meant to take up roughly 50% of the width of the screen and 80% of the height of the screen. All right, let's think about how to deal with that. So if we go back to our scene window here, and we have this giant brown menu, we need to make it, it says it should take up 50% of the width of the screen. So that means essentially if we want it to be centered on the screen, which we do, we need to have 25% of the screen empty on the left. Then we will use 50% of the screen for our menu, and then 25% of the screen on the right. Or if you had a more complicated number and you're trying to figure it out, you could just, subtract, the amount that you want your screen, your menu to take up from 100. So 100 minus 50, and that would be 50, and then divide that by 2. So we have two equal sides, or two equal portions of emptiness on the left and the right. So that's where you get the 25%. So I need this to start 25% over. Now I could assume, since I know we're gonna use a 1920 width, I could do the math, like multiply, see what 25% of 1920 is. But in Unity, when we have, by default, we've got this thing taking up the whole screen, right? We can actually type in with these anchors. So 0 is going to be all the way to the left. If I type in, or see, and then here max is 1 is all the way to the right. So that's like 0 to 100%. I could start at 0.25. So you can see these are the anchors. They moved over 25% of the way. And I could go until 75%, because that's 100 minus 25. So 0.75. And so that would give us the distance that we need. So now we just need to we need to readjust the image so that it matches the anchors here. So you can see what we're doing is just, we would go into here and where it says right, and we're going to hit 0. And then where it says left, we're going to hit 0. And so now it's mapping perfectly to our 50% of the middle of the screen. Next was the height. I believe our document said it's meant to take up 80% of the height of the screen. So 100 minus 80 is 20. Divided by 2 is 10, so we want to have a 10% cushion on the top and bottom. So we can use that same technique here. We're going to go for our anchors on the Y. So 0 is going to be the very top, I think, and 1 is the very bottom. I'm not sure. We're going to find out, but we want 10%. Oh, no, okay, yeah, 0 is the bottom. So 0.1 would be 10%. So you can see it moved up to here. And then for the max, like how tall, we want to leave 10% on the top as well. So that would be 0.9, right? 100 minus 10 is 90, so 0.9, right? And so we need this to match. So you could try to drag that down like that, or to be real precise about it, you just want to go in here to where it says top. This is like how much above our max do we want it to go? Well, I want it to go 0 above the max, and for bottom I want it to go 0 below the max. I don't know why it's giving me these like tiny numbers, but it's effectively working. There we go. Remember, I told you this can be finicky, so while I'm thinking of it, let's go ahead and save. File, save. All right. Anyhow, now the menu is taking up the amount of space that was described in the mock-up. Now, whether this is how you want your menu to look or not is not necessarily relevant. I'm going to go over how to follow a mock-up because I think that's, honestly, if you can follow a mock-up and make it in Unity, if some graphic designer gives you a menu and you can build it in Unity, that's a employable skill right there. You can get a job doing that. So I'm going to show you how to make this, and then you can make whatever you want. But it is important to understand like how to look at the specifications for a thing and create that. All right. So let's see what makes sense to do next. I suppose I can see this menu is roughly broken up into two parts. There's this left-hand part, which has rows of icons, and then this right-hand part, which has the item description area. So essentially, this layout, we could describe it as being like a two-column layout. There's this left column, and then there's this right column. And there's a way, there's a nifty layout system in Unity to sort of help us create these types of layouts. So I've identified that there's going to be two columns. I'm going to make an empty game object. So right click on your panel, because it's important that, all of my UI that's meant to be part of this inventory menu panel is a child of it. So I'm going to create an empty game object that's a child of this panel. I'm going to call it left column. I'll go back to the scene view here. And I'm going to make another empty game object. And this one will be called the right column. And then if I go to my panel, I can add, if you find, well, it's already here. I'm going to show you how to find it if you don't know. Go to the layout section, and we want to get a horizontal layout group. And if you were to look carefully at this icon, it's sort of showing us this two column, but you could have as many columns as you wanted. Basically, for every object that's a child of this, we'll kind of create another column. That's what the horizontal layout group does. So my columns now, they are not arranged the way I want, but we can set it up so that our layout group will automatically size these things so that it can be like two equal columns, at least for now. So I'm going to go back to my panel, which has the horizontal layout group, and I'm going to choose, just check where it says child control size. I'm going to do that for both the height and the width. And now if I go and select my columns, you can see that they are, so that's the left column and that's the right column. So they're perfectly taking up the left half and right half of my menu. Now if I look at the mock-up, this is maybe taking up more than well, the left column looks a little larger, and so we can kind of deal with that at some point, but for now I'm going to leave it half and half and see how things go. Alright, so I think we need to keep thinking about it big picture wise, like what are the main pieces of each column now? We've established that this is a two column layout, but how about within each column, what's going on? So in the left column, there is like there are rows of buttons, and then there's an exit menu button. And then in the right column, there's this description text area. So I think we want to sort of set up like when you start the game, you will have nothing in your inventory, and as you pick things up, it will fill up, right? What if, one way we could do this is set it up so that you could just, whatever happens, you're only allowed to have 9 things. But I would like this to be a little more open-ended. I would like, the designer to create as many inventory objects as they think are necessary. So I'm actually going to imagine this as maybe Once you have more than 9, there will be a scroll bar, and you can scroll and see however many inventory objects there are. Same thing here. What if I want to type a really long note? I imagine this will need a scroll bar if the description text is longer than what fits in here, rather than just saying, sorry, you can't have that long of a description. I'm going to actually support scroll bar here. So essentially we have a scroll view here and a scroll view here. So let's go ahead and add those. So in Unity, on my left column, I'm going to right click and go to UI and choose scroll view. And in my right column, I'm going to right click and choose UI and choose scroll view. Okay. Now again, looking at the layout, in this left column, besides the scroll view full of icons, there's also this exit menu button. Now, this button should not be part of this scroll view. It should be outside of it or below it. So on my left column, I'm going to go ahead and add the button for, this will be my quit button. I can name it that too before I forget, because I'm going to start adding a lot of stuff, and it's probably a good idea to start naming things. On that note, let's go ahead and rename this scroll view. Let's call it the inventory list scroll view. And on the right column, let's go ahead and name this one the description text scroll view. Okay. So on the left column here, I don't want the button to, this is not the layout I'm looking for. So I need the button to be down here, and then the scroll view should be up above it. But I want to use actually another layout component to sort of automate that for me so I don't mess it up. So I'm going to go back. I'm on the left column, game object. I'm going to add a component, a layout component. And so I want the objects in this left column to be arranged according to a vertical layout group like this, right? They're stacked one on top of the other. So we have the scroll view and then the button. All right, well, so that's a little better. It's still not quite right. So if we look again at our mock-up, we can see that it's not starting flush at the top of the menu like this scroll view of buttons here. There's some cushioning between where the first button is and the top of the menu. Same thing with the left and the bottom here. So that is what we're calling padding here. So in this vertical layout group, I'm going to add some padding to the top. I don't know, we'll start with 10, but it probably may need to be bigger. We'll see. And I'm going to add 10 on the bottom, even though it's nowhere near the bottom yet. I want to resize the scroll view so it kind of fills up more of the screen here. So I'm going to select the scroll view, and you could just sort of like willy-nilly resize it, I guess. But I'm going to just type in a couple numbers. I want it to be more specific than like see how it's like 0.6 and 0.1. I want to use more specific numbers, or like whole numbers, I guess I should say. So let's try something like 475 by 600. And that seems kind of similar to the size I'm looking for. Again, it would be great if I knew the exact numbers from my artist, but we can kind of improvise here. All right. So now let's go ahead and adjust the size of our exit button down here. let's basically make it as wide as this. So this one was 475, so let's make this one 475. There we go. And let's make it a little taller too. Like I can just kind of drag this until it seems about right. You can look in the game view to get a more realistic idea of how big things will appear. Again, make sure you're, oops, I didn't mean to click that. Make sure you're in the 16:9 aspect ratio. So maybe something like 50. So again, I don't want to just leave this like 0.9 junk. Let's just make it an even 50. All right. And you know, we're getting closer and closer. We're not perfect. It clearly doesn't look perfect yet, but it's an iterative process. I think actually maybe we should make the button a little bigger. So maybe even let's make the button like 100 height. I think that is kind of more true to our menu. Bye. It's okay. If we look at this scroll view here, it's starting in the very top left corner. And if we look at our mock-up, it's kind of centered in the column. So if we go to our left column layout group and we say look at where it says child alignment, we should probably say it should start in the middle center instead of the top left. And that looks far better right away. Again, now you can kind of see it looks a little more like what we're going for. Okay, so the left column's looking a little better. Let's focus on the right column a minute. There's actually, so if you see when you click on this, it's showing there's a label that's presumably kind of telling me the name. Yeah, the area on the right displays the item's name and a short description. So we need to add, we have this scroll view for the description text, but we don't have this little spot for the item's name. And so if I go back to Unity, more or less, I want this to be, I guess it could be a panel, but I think, so when you put in a panel, it comes in with this like transparent thing, and it's of the component is actually of the type image. I think if we go to this right column, we can right click and add a UI object that's just of the type image. And it's pretty similar to a panel, I guess. It's just not transparent by default, which is not how our layout looks, right? This thing is not transparent, but it is like a different color, so we're gonna need it, I think. And it's gonna have, I'm gonna right click on the image and add a child component that's going to be of the type text. And we can use this. Basically, I'll just say whatever it said in the mockup, which was the item. I think that's what it said, right? We can go look. Yeah, the item. All right. And so let's arrange the image first. So the image needs to basically be exactly as long as the text area. So let's see, how big is this thing? So let's adjust the size of the scroll view first, because get that a little more accurate. I'd say, well, first of all, even before we do that, now that we have two things, how do we want them laid out? We want to use some sort of layout technique. So in our right column, how should we handle the layout of the image and the scroll view? Again, you can see they're just stacked up vertically. So that means maybe the right column should have a vertical layout group. Where is the dumb layout? Oh, it's not in UI, it's in layout. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change this one to start in the, well, I'm going to choose upper center and then just manually add some padding to the top, because if we look at this one, it's not quite perfectly centered in here. So I don't know, and this, I don't think it needs to 100% match the mockup, but we'll try to get close. So we can see it's starting, this is actually lower than this. So I just typed in 75 and that seems to get lower than that one. Okay. The text area I think should be a little taller. So I'm going to select the scroll view. And I'm going to adjust the width of my scroll view and the height. So you can see as I'm adjusting this, it's actually changing my column size because I'm using layout groups everywhere. So things are kind of automatically adjusting, which is cool. Anyway, let's go. I want it to be kind of as big as I can get away with. So maybe something like 350. And then height-wise, maybe something like 500. Okay, so now our little image down here, our label is definitely not correct. So let's take a look at him. So first of all, I know it should be as wide as this whole scroll view. So if I've already forgotten what that was. 350, so let's make it 350 width. And I don't know, 100 height is probably okay. Is that what I made this one? Yeah, so that's kind of consistent, I suppose. We need it to not be that far down. So I think what I'm going to do is select my right column here. And I'm trying to make this move up. So let's try, that's the amount of space between the objects in this vertical layout group. So we can actually go lower than 0 to like get this to just about line up. So I don't know, we'll leave it like minus 190 for now, but this is we're gonna need to fine tune it in a bit, because we don't quite, I'm not quite satisfied with how this thing looks yet, and once we change that, it'll change everything else. Okay. So we're getting closer. The next big thing that's missing, in my opinion, would be these, these rows of inventory icons. There's supposed to be an icon for each object you've picked up. And you can click the icon, and then that's what selects it. And once it's selected, it will show up in this area. So I'm going to use buttons, I guess, because buttons are things you can click. So we're going to make a grid of buttons. And so this is in our left column. So let's go back to the left column. And we need these buttons to be in this scroll view, because this is going to, the whole point of the scroll view is to support more than 9 of these inventory buttons, basically. So let's go over to the scroll view and expand it a little bit. And let's go into the viewport and expand that. You can see when you add the scroll view, it comes with a handful of things. So the scroll view has a viewport. Inside of that is content. And then it also has these 2 scroll bars. So anyway, we are going to add stuff as a child of the content. So I'm going to right click on the content, and I'm going to add a button. So there's a button. And I'm going to need at least 4 buttons to test this layout, because we should have 3 buttons, and then the 4th one should be on a new row. So as long as we have 4, we can test it and make sure it's going to work right. And so I'm just going to quickly duplicate this button. So I've got the button selected here. I'm going to hit Control D until there are 4 buttons. Now they're all stacked up in the exact same spot. So you can't really tell, they all appear like there's one, but I could move it a little bit. Oops, I did something else. I could move it a little bit, and you see there's, several buttons here. Now, I want the layout of these buttons to absolutely be controlled automatically, because what's going to happen is each time you pick up a new object, I need to dynamically add a new inventory object button, and I want it to just appear in the right spot. So that's where our layout group is really going to pay off. So this content needs to have a special layout group. So we'll go to Add Component, Layout. I don't know why I have a hard time finding this every time. And we're going to add the Grid Layout group. And if you look carefully at that, you'll see this is similar to the layout we're hoping to get based on the mock-up. But I can see that mine has 4, and it looks like, well, so let's see what happens if I were to add a 5th. Now the 5th one came down to the next row. Well, we want it to be 3, and then the 4th one comes down to the next row. So let's try playing around with the grid layout group. So we can make, I suppose if I make them bigger, that would help. But also I should probably adjust it so that they're not so tightly packed. Remember, if we look at our mock-up, there's a decent amount of space in between each object, and then a bigger amount of space in this vertical spacing here. And lucky for us, we get separate values for the X and the Y. So let's add like 25 spacing on the X, and then like 100 on the Y. Something like that. That's too much. How about 50? Yeah. All right. And hey, look, check it out. Already, I've only got 3 up here, so that's good. But I don't like how these are arranged. This should be like more centered in here. But rather, I suppose, than trying to like shift all these over, maybe I can actually get away with making the buttons themselves a little bigger. Like why waste the space? Let's use it a little bit. So let's leave that there, and let's see what happens if I make this like 125 by 125. That looks better. I'm digging that. So we'll leave something like that for now. And so yeah, like it's cool once you have this layout group set up, you can test, just select one of these buttons and hit Control D, and you'll see how new ones just come in, right? So now all of a sudden I have a situation where I may need to scroll to see them all. I'm just going to try running the game and see what happens. So it sort of works, not quite. We'll fix it. All right. So first of all, you know, I don't ever want you to be able to scroll left and right on this menu. I'm just clicking and dragging to do this, by the way. So I'm just going to totally disable that. So go to your content, or I'm sorry, your scroll view, inventory list scroll view. And I'm going to look for where it's talking about horizontal scrolling right here. So see where it says horizontal? I'm going to uncheck that because I don't ever want that to happen. And I don't want to like ever look at this stupid scroll bar either. You can see by default, the scroll bars show up when they need to. Basically, that's what this auto hide is doing. I want to just not have a horizontal scroll bar ever. So I think I can just delete it. So I'm going to click it to make it easy to find here. And I'm just going to delete it. And I hope that won't break anything. You might want to save before you do that. But now you can see there's no scroll bar there. And it's, it was never working right, but it's working just as good as it was. So that's cool. So the new problem is that how do we make our vertical scroll bar actually work correctly? And so if you look at the content area here, the way that the scroll bars work basically is that if this content area is larger than the viewport, so here's the viewport, you can see it's from here all the way to there, and here's the content area, it's from here to here. So right now, my scroll view thinks that my content is only taking up like half of the viewport, so it's like, why would we need a scroll bar? There's only half of it's being used. So what we need to do is figure out how to make this content area automatically expand based on how many buttons are in there, right? And luckily there's a easy way to do that. You can, so like I could just drag this down and make it bigger, but that would not work dynamically. It would be like a set size always. And if we added more and more and more buttons, it may not work correctly. So in order to make it like dynamically resize each time a new button is added, we can add, make sure you're on the content here, the content game object of your inventory list scroll view. And there's something we can add called a content size fitter. So this thingy. This should make it so that our content area will automatically resize based on whatever's in it. So all these buttons in this case. We have to tell it how we want it to work. We want it to adjust the vertical fit to be the preferred size. And check it out. See, it already did it. So I changed the vertical fit to preferred size, and now it knows it needs to be all the way this big to be large enough to show all of these buttons that are children of it. So now the content is actually bigger than the viewport, so when I run the game, I should get my scroll view. There it is. So I can scroll. You can use the mouse wheel. It's incredibly slow. That's actually something you can adjust. I'm not super worried about it at this point. Cool part is it's scrolling, and so I can show you that this all works dynamically. So while the game is running, I could go in and delete most of these buttons. I'll delete all of them but one. And now watch what happens as game's still running. I'm gonna hit Control D. This is sort of simulating picking up an object while the game's running. All right, no scroll yet. I have to add quite a few of them, and then eventually, boom, scroll bars up. I could keep adding more and more and more and more, and I can keep scrolling more and more and more. So this part is working well. That's cool.